Salve omnes, this is Magister Hodges, and this is week 3 of our Unit 0 review to begin Latin 2 on FVA. This week we're going to be looking at the perfect system of verbs. That's the perfect tense, the pluperfect tense, and the future perfect tense, which is a mouthful. We'll also be looking at how to identify in the special characteristics of third IO, and fourth conjugation verbs. And a lot of this may be new for some of you, may be review for others. That's okay. This is just supposed to be a brief overview, so you're just aware of these things. This information, I'm not expecting you to have it totally memorized, unless you're, if you're going for AP, you're going to want to have this stuff in your head, and that's what we're going to be working on over the year. But at first, you guys will be allowed to use resources and whatnot on quizzes, etc. So, it is, so just, we're going to go through the first time. Don't stress too much about memorizing, but just be familiar with it. And as we get through the year, hopefully practice will help make perfect. So the first thing you do, and this presentation will be linked in the YouTube video. It's also linked on its learning as well as on Google Classroom. But before you begin, please take the pre-quiz. Hit pause on this video, go smash this link, and go take the pre-quiz. As always, the pre-quiz is not graded. It will give you a score, but it will not go in as a grade. And you only have one attempt. This is just for me to see where everybody is before we even start. So, so pause this video, go try this out, and come back and resume when you're ready. Okay, so in this presentation this week, let me move my head. We're going to be working on identifying verbs in the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect tenses, identifying the subjects of a sentence by looking at a verb's ending, correctly translating verbs based on their tense, person, and number, form a verb in the present, imperfect, and the 3 perfect tenses, identify the conjugation of verbs based off its first 2 principal parts, and that is conjugations 1 through 4. And understand the function of a verb's first 3 principal parts in a dictionary entry. So we're going to go over all of that in here. This is a beefy presentation, so get yourself a Red Bull and buckle up. All right, so let's start by just going back over some important terms that we're going to be using here. Move my fat head again. There we go. All right, so when we talk about a verb's person, we're describing the subject. First, second, or third person, be I, you, or he, she, or it, or we, y'all, or they. Number tells us whether there is one subject or multiple subjects. Floating back up here. And when the verb, and tense tells us when the verb is happening, and that'll be present tense, imperfect tense, perfect. We're going to be looking at all of them now. So here's a little chart down here to lay out the difference between first, second, and third person, singular and plural, and the Latin equivalents of these words down below. This is good to know. All right. So I'm going to get my face out of here real quick. I think I'm doing that at least. I don't know. I'm floating around. Okay. Perfect tense verbs, which is what we're going to be focusing on this week, show a completed action in the past. It took place at one point. Whereas the imperfect tense that we've been learning about, they show an ongoing or incomplete action in the past. Here's some examples of a perfect tense verb. Billy saw Melinda at the turtle convention. The imperfect tense version of that. Billy was running to greet Melinda, fellow turtle lover. So he saw her there. That was one time completed action. After he saw her, he was running. And now that you can see how that's incomplete or an ongoing action. Here's another example. Melinda tried to hide from Billy, but her secret life had been exposed. The imperfect version of that. Melinda was trying to hide from Billy, but her secret was being exposed. So you can see typically when it's imperfect, we're translating with was or were. With the perfect, we're typically seeing an ed at the end, or that weird version of the past tense we see in English, like saw, as opposed to see. Perfect tense verbs can typically be translated as blanked, has blanked, or did blank, as opposed to the imperfect, which is was blanking, used to blank, or kept on blanking. Typically, we'll just say was blanking. So let's look back at the present and imperfect to review what we did last week and use that as the framework for learning the next 3 tenses as well. So just as a reminder, when you're given a verb in this year's vocab, you'll be given the 4 principal parts of the verb, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. We got 2 different verbs here, and these are how they all work. The first principal part is always going to be the first person singular in the present tense. Saluto would mean I greet. Video would mean I see. The second principal part is the infinitive, and that's without a subject. So salutare is to greet. Videre is to see. And we're going to be talking about this third principal part here in a minute because that's going to be important for learning the perfect tense. Salutavi is the first person singular of the perfect tense, I greeted. And witty is the first person singular perfect tense of saw, or see. So witty means I saw. When we're forming present and imperfect verbs, like we talked about last week, we only really need these first 2 principal parts. We don't worry about the third one. We definitely don't worry about the fourth one. So that's why these are green and these are red. This one will turn green here in a little bit. So looking back at the present tense, we just look at amo, amare. The first principal part gives you the first person singular, amo, so you can just copy that there. It ends with o, meaning I'm doing it. And you can see the rest, how the rest of it works with its endings. The present tense endings are all underlined. Okay, and the infinitive form amare here is to love. To form the stem, and stem is an important definition to remember back from when we were doing our nouns. The stem of a verb is the ending onto which all the, or is the beginning of the word, the root of the word, onto which all the other endings will be added. For this week, or for the present tense and first conjugation verbs, it's as simple as taking the second principal part, amare, and removing the re. You do that for all second, third singular, first through third plural. The first singular is just the first principal part, so amo. In the imperfect tense, there we go. I'm back now. In the imperfect tense, we look at the second principal part, drop the re, and then we add on our endings, bam, bas, bat, bamus, batis, band. I was loving, you were loving, he was loving, so on and so forth. So that's the review of what we did last week. Let's look at how we approach the perfect system differently. So let's talk about what the perfect system means when I say that. The perfect system of Latin verbs contains 3 different tenses, and they all have the word perfect in them. The perfect tense is a completed action in the past. The pluperfect tense, and that's the one that's translated as blanked, typically. Pluperfect tense is an action that was completed before another action in the past. It's like a super past tense, and that would be like had blanked. And we're going to look at some examples here in a second of what that looks like in English. And then we have this weird one that we don't use all that often, but it's, I'm just going to throw it out there so that we know it exists. The future perfect tense, and that's an action that will be completed in the future, and that'll be translated as will have blanked. Okay, so these are important terms to remember. Perfect, pluperfect, future perfect, and the most important part about it is not so much, knowing the grammatical function is important, but the more important thing is that if it's perfect tense, you know how it's translated. Perfect means blanked. Pluperfect, had blanked. Future perfect, will have blanked. As opposed to the present, blanks or is blanking, and the imperfect, was or were blanking. Those are also important to remember. So let's see how we use the 4 principal parts here to figure out our stem for the perfect tense. So notice how this third one is now green. That's because this third principal part that you're given, salutavi, or witty in this case, is the first person singular of the perfect tense. I greeted and I saw. So this is what they're giving you, a version of the word in the perfect tense. So the third principal part serves as the stem for all perfect system verbs, no matter whether it's present, perfect, pluperfect, or future perfect. So we're going to start with this. Let's look at how it works. So let's look at the perfect tense of amo, amare, amawi, amatus from earlier. To find the stem of this, the chunk of the word that you'll add the endings onto, you take the third principal part and chop off the I, and you can add on all the other endings. For those of you who were in my Latin 1 class last year, we only really looked at the third person singular and plural. So these other endings are going to be kind of new information. I'll have a chart for you guys at the end of this presentation that you can keep saved, and that will help you remember all of these. But the endings are I, isti, it, imus, istis, erunt. Amawi means I loved. Amawisti means you loved. Amawit, he, she, or it loved. Amawimus, we loved. Amawistis, y'all loved. And amawerunt, they loved. And that's the perfect tense. Let's talk about the pluperfect. So same with the pluperfect. You form the stem by taking the third principal part, amawi, and then chopping, getting rid of that I. And we're going to add all of our endings onto it. And we're left with amaweram, eras, erat, eramus, eratis, erant. You may recognize these eram, eras, erat as just the imperfect version of est. And that's correct. That's basically all you do. You just add the imperfect form of est onto the end of the third principal part of a verb, and that's how you form the pluperfect tense. So amaweram, I had loved. Amaweras, you had loved. Amawerat, he had loved. Amaweramus, it's a mouthful, we had loved. Amaweratis, y'all had loved. And amawerant, they had loved. Okay. You'll see this more often than you think. And then lastly, we have the future perfect tense, which, like I said, is not all that common. We're not going to see it a whole lot, maybe only a handful of times this year. But it's just a matter of changing a singular letter to learn what it looks like. So it's good to be introduced to it now. Same as the other ones, for all the other perfect system verbs, you're going to find the stem by taking the third principal part, amawi, removing the I, and adding these endings, ero, eris, erit, erimus, eritis, erint. And this is actually the future tense of est, so it means like will be. So amawero, I will have loved. Amaweris, you will have loved. Amawerit, he, she, or it will have loved. Amawerimus, we will have loved. Amaweritis, y'all will have loved. And amawerint, they will have loved. Okay, so that's the quick breakdown of how you form these tenses, the perfect, pluperfect, and future perfect. You're welcome to come back and look at this part if you ever get confused. So let's look at some example sentences here. Postquam barbaros in via videram ex urbe fugivi. So we'll see videram is our first verb here, meaning I had seen. Postquam is after, so after I had seen barbaros, the barbarians, in via, in the street, ex urbe fugivi. So we have fugivi here, which is the perfect tense of fugit, meaning to flee. So fugivi would mean I fled ex urbe, from the city. So we see an example here of how the pluperfect videram it shows like that super past tense. It's like all of this sentence takes place in the past, but videram means is the thing that happened first. After I had seen this, I then did this. Both of these are in the past, but the first thing that happened was videram, I had seen. And that's how that works. Antequam ad termas cum amicis peto, in horto patris valde laboravero. Good times. Antequam ad termas cum amicis peto. Antequam is the opposite of postquam, it means before. Antequam peto. Before I had, and that means like to head for. It also means to attack, but in this case, it's going to mean head. So this is present tense. This is happening now. Before I head to the baths with my friends, ad termas cum amicis, I will have worked. Laboravero. That is the future perfect tense. It's like I will have done this before I do this. I will have worked much in my father's garden. In horto patris, in my father's garden, valde. I will have worked much. All right. So that's a short example of how those work in sentences. And we'll be reviewing this throughout the year, so no worries. So let's talk about identifying different conjugations. We only have about a minute here. Actually, I'm going to cut this video here and do the conjugations in part 2. So, valete.